Orchids are the largest known family of flowering plants, containing almost 30,000 species and tens of thousands of hybrids. They're known for their bright and intricate flowers and can be found everywhere except Antarctica. But what most people don't know is they have an unusual germination process compared to other flowering plants. I'm going to explain the difference in orchids growing in nature versus cultivation and show you how I grow orchid seeds. Before I show you how I grow orchids from seeds, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the life of an orchid, as well as a little bit of history on how they're grown in cultivation. So if you just want to see me grow orchids from seeds, you can skip to this time. Like most flowers, seed pods are created once the orchid flowers have been pollinated. And depending on the species, it can take over a year before the seed pod is ripe. Most flower seeds have what's called an endosperm, and this is like a nutrient reserve that the seed will use for energy to produce its first roots and leaves. Orchid seeds lack this endosperm and therefore cannot create their own energy to start growing. So from here, orchids can be grown in one of two ways. In nature, orchid seeds rely on symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi to start their life. When the seeds come in contact with the fungi, they almost act like a parasite and latch on to the fungi for nutrients. And the mycelium provide this little seed with nutrients so it can start its life and grow into what is called a protocorm. This is actually the embryo of the plant and acts as a bulb that the leaves will sprout from. From there, they are referred to as seedlings. Growing seeds by sowing them in soil can take orchids 1 to 8 years to get to the seedling phase. And from there, it can still take 2 to 10 years, depending on the species, to reach maturity. So we're looking at possibly 20 years, depending on the species, that is. But with tissue culture, the second option, this time can be cut down to 1 to 3 years. In another 3 to 5 years, the seedlings will have developed into mature plants ready to start the cycle over again. Growing orchid seeds in cultivation is pretty difficult to achieve because you need the mycorrhizal fungi native to the same area as the orchid you're working with is from. So you can't just throw mycelium in a pot of orchid seeds and hope for the best. Growing orchids was actually deemed nearly impossible and a luxury to have until 1922. This is when the first orchid was successfully germinated in vitro by a man named Louis Kuntzen. Kuntzen's success with orchid culture in vitro made orchids more readily available and extraordinarily bypassed the need for a symbiotic relationship with fungi. This actually made orchids one of the earliest plants to be grown in sterile conditions, as plant tissue culture was invented in 1898. This also opened the door of possibilities of what could be done with lab techniques and plant tissue. Just because this process made orchid seeds easier to grow more reliably doesn't mean they're easy in general. This project actually took me 9 months to film, and it is only the beginning of the orchid growing journey. The first step to growing orchids is acquiring the seeds. So I went to Carnivorous Plant Nursery and decided to go with 2 types of bog orchids native to my area. The first being a rose begonia, and the second being orange fringe orchids. I start by taking the label off the packet, and I'm actually going to fold this label up and use this kind of like a funnel to put the seeds into test tubes later on. And then I tap the seeds out onto the paper. Because orchid seeds lack that endosperm I mentioned earlier, the seeds are almost the size of dust. It even makes this piece of fluval stratum look gigantic. And then I carefully tap these seeds into microcentrifuge tubes. Next, I'll be taking a page out of Rusty Exotic's book and fill the vials with sugar water. Sometimes fungal spores can remain dormant and pop up later in vitro. The sugar water encourages any contamination to bloom now and be wiped out in sterilization. And I let these seeds sit in the sugar water for 24 hours. When I come back the following day, I drain the sugar water from each tube and give them a little rinse with distilled water. After about 2 minutes, I drain the distilled water to start sterilization. I use a bleach solution of 1 part household bleach to 9 parts distilled water to sterilize my seeds. And I let them sit in this for 1 hour, occasionally agitating the seeds. Side note, I did not realize there was a hole in my glove until I was done with the bleach, but here I am draining the bleach with a sterile syringe. Now that the seeds have been sterilized, we want to keep everything else sterile from here on out. And our last step is to take hydrogen peroxide and give the seeds one final cleaning for about a minute before putting them in vitro. And then I just take a test tube and dump it straight onto my orchid media. I'll put the media recipe somewhere on screen as usual. And then I wrap up the container as an extra precaution against contaminants. And because my orchids are native to the Northeast, they need cold stratification to begin growing. Not all orchid seeds need this, so make sure you know if you're working with temperate or tropical orchids. And in about 8 to 12 weeks, they get put on my grow shelf. And then I waited, and waited some more, and kept waiting.
6 months later!
And finally, we saw some movement in the rose begonias. And the results were so tiny my camera couldn't even focus on it. This almost microscopic sized ball is the beginning of an orchid, or the protocorm I mentioned earlier. And a few weeks later, the orange fringe orchids followed. The reason I keep saying this is just the beginning of my orchid growing journey is because it can still take a few months from here for the orchids to develop their first set of leaves. This embryo will continue to swell until that happens, collecting nutrients, giving it energy to produce the leaves. But as these guys start to grow leaves, I'll separate them a little bit more and give them more room to grow in bigger media containers. I hope this video gave you a little bit more insight into how orchids are grown, because this is the process even orchids at the store that you see are grown. And also, if you get them from private sellers, this is how they're grown as well. And in next week's video, I'm going to tell you how to avoid plant scams on Black Friday.
And then we look at this listing, a completely different shop name with really great prices. I check out the reviews, and again, all the reviews are the same. It's even the same freaking guy.
See you next time.